look up on a clear night, and you might just make out a hazy patch about as wide as your outstretched hand that's the Hyades star cluster.
Yeah, it's pretty prominent once you know where to look.
More than just a pretty sight, though,
Yeah.
right? It's a fundamental stepping stone in figuring out the vast distances of the cosmos.
Absolutely fundamental.
So today, we're diving deep into this stellar family, uncovering the latest insights thanks to some truly groundbreaking research, particularly from the incredible Gaia space mission.
And what's fascinating here is that, well, astronomers have been studying the Hyades for over a century. Gaia is providing us with a level of precision that's really changing the game.
How so?
It's like going from, I don't know, a blurry photograph to a high-definition 3D map. The detail is just phenomenal.
Okay, so for those of us who might not spend all our night stargazing, let's unpack this a bit. What exactly are these open clusters, like the Hyades?
Right.
And why do they get astronomers so excited?
Well, think of an open cluster as a family of stars, maybe hundreds of siblings, born together from the same huge cosmic cloud of gas and dust.
Okay, born together.
Exactly. And that shared birth means they generally have the same age and the same initial ingredients, the same chemical composition.
Oh, okay.
And that's what makes them so valuable for studying how stars live and die. It's like having a controlled experiment.
Right, like having a group of identical twins of different weights, maybe. So you can study how mass affects their development over time.
That's a great analogy, yeah. It lets us isolate factors like mass when we study stellar evolution.
Right, it's like a natural experiment happening right in our galactic backyard. And the Hyades, being our closest open cluster neighbor,
Right.
well, it's been crucial in building what we call the cosmic distance ladder, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Our sources remind us that the Hyades, along with the slightly more distant Pleiades, have long served as crucial benchmarks. Rung 1, essentially.
For measuring distances to far-off galaxies.
Exactly. Astronomers compare the patterns of brightness and temperature, what they call the main sequence of stars in these nearby clusters, with those in more distant ones. By matching these patterns, they can use the well-measured distances to the Hyades and Pleiades as a kind of ruler, to gauge the universe's vastness.
So this relatively nearby group of stars is absolutely fundamental to understanding the scale of everything. That's pretty wild.
It really is foundational work.
Our sources point to the pioneering work of Louis Boss way back in 1908 as a major kickoff for Hyades research.
Yeah, Boss's work was really seminal.
What were the big questions those early astronomers were trying to answer?
Primarily, they were trying to pin down the cluster's distance. That was the big one.
Just how far away is it?
Exactly. And also understand the fundamental properties of its member stars, things like their brightness and temperature, and how they relate to each other on diagrams like the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. Boss's work really set the stage for decades of investigations aimed at making these measurements more and more precise. It's been a century-long quest to really understand this cosmic family.
A century-long quest.
Yeah.
And then in 1997, along came the Hipparcos mission, which our sources suggest was a real leap forward.
Oh, definitely. A huge leap.
How did that mission sharpen our view of the Hyades?
Well, Hipparcos gave us a massive jump in accuracy for distance measurements. While different methods had given us a general idea of the Hyades' distance before, Hipparcos provided direct geometrical measurements.
Like a cosmic surveyor using triangulation.
Precisely. It measured parallax, that tiny shift in a star's apparent position as the Earth orbits the Sun with incredible precision for its time.
Right.
And that let astronomers determine distances to individual stars in the Hyades with about 20% accuracy, which was pretty good back then.
Okay, 20% for the core.
For around 100 stars near the cluster center, Hipparcos pinned down a mean distance of 46.34 parsecs.
Wow.
Yeah, and with a very small margin of error, plus or minus 0.27 parsecs.
That's a huge increase in confidence compared to before. But our sources also mentioned that Hipparcos had some limitations. What were those?
Yeah, well, one key thing you got to remember is that Hipparcos needed a list of stars to observe beforehand. It didn't just scan everything.
So it was pre-selected targets.
Exactly.
Yep.
For the Hyades, around 240 potential member stars scattered across a large patch of sky, maybe 30 to 40 degrees across, were selected.
Yeah.
So while this gave us a good sample of confirmed members, somewhere between maybe 140 and 200 stars, it wasn't a comprehensive survey of the entire cluster and its surroundings. It was more like taking a well-informed guess at who belonged to the family.
So it wasn't a complete family photo, more like a selection of known relatives.
You could put it that way, yeah.
What else did Hipparcos teach us about the Hyades?
Well, the Hipparcos data showed that as you look further away from the dense core of the cluster, it becomes harder to tell the true Hyades members apart from the background stars in our galaxy.
The field stars.
Yeah, the field stars. They start to mix together both in where they are located spatially and how they are moving kinematically.
Okay, so the edges get blurry.
Kind of, yeah. But for the stars that were confirmed as members, Hipparcos showed that the cluster as a whole moves very uniformly through space.
Like they're all traveling together?
Very much so. And the individual stars within it have very small relative motions with respect to each other, a low velocity dispersion, about 0.3 kilometers per second.
Right, like a well-drilled marching band moving together, as you said before.
Exactly. Very coherent movement.
That makes sense. They're all traveling together on the same galactic highway.
Yeah.
And what about the ages of these stellar siblings? What did Hipparcos tell us?
So, by carefully studying the point where these stars settle onto the main sequence after forming what's called the zero-age main sequence, and using our understanding of their initial composition, particularly helium, Hipparcos data allowed astronomers to model that and estimate the Hyades age at around 625 million years.
Give or take.
Give or take about 50 million years, so pretty well constrained for the time.
Okay, so that was our best picture of the Hyades before Gaia. Now let's get to the real revolution. How has the Gaia mission fundamentally changed how we see this star cluster?
Oh, fundamentally is the right word.
Our sources talk about significant improvements. What have we actually learned? What's the big difference?
Well, the impact of Gaia has been truly transformative, just massive. Unlike Hipparcos, Gaia surveys essentially every star down to very faint levels, about 20th or 21st magnitude across the entire sky.
The whole sky,
Yeah.
not just selected target.
The whole sky. And its measurements of star positions and motions, the astrometry, are an order of magnitude, sometimes even 2 orders of magnitude, so 10 to 100 times more precise than Hipparcos.
Wow.
Plus, it simultaneously measures the brightness and colors of these stars, the photometry, with really high accuracy, too.
So it's more stars, much higher precision, and photometry all at once.
Exactly. This flood of incredibly precise data has allowed us to dissect the Hyades in ways we could only dream of before. It's just a completely different level of detail.
Our sources mention that even the early data from Gaia, Data Release 1, gave us a hint of what was to come,
Yes, that was back in 2018.
identifying a good number of new potential members.
That's right. That early glimpse showed the power of Gaia. Even with the first data release, using its TGAS subset, researchers identified 251 new candidate members.
Just from that initial data.
Yeah, but it was Gaia Data Release 2 that really blew the lid off things. That's where the revolution truly kicked in.
And one of the key studies highlighted is by Lodieu and colleagues in 2019. What did their analysis of this new, richer DR2 data reveal about the Hyades family?
Well, Lodieu and his team started with an enormous sample, over 126,000 objects observed by Gaia within a 70-degree radius of the cluster center. Huge area.
Okay.
They initially focused on stars that appeared to be relatively close, based on parallax, so within 100 parsecs. Then, through a careful iterative process of looking at not just their distances, but crucially, their motions across the sky, their proper motions.
As they move together.
Exactly. They identified a staggering 1764 stars that share the Hyades' overall movement.
Whoa, wait. From maybe 200 known members before Gaia to over 1,700?
That's right. More than double the number of members we had painstakingly cataloged in the entire previous century, probably closer to 8 or 9 times the Hipparcos sample.
Wow, that's an incredible expansion of the Hyades family. It really shows the power of having such a detailed and precise all-sky map.
It really does.
And they didn't just stop at counting, did they? They started to look at the structure within the cluster.
Exactly. They further refined their analysis by looking at stars within different zones around the cluster's center. They defined a core region.
The dense part?
Yeah, about 3 parsecs radius. Then the tidal radius, that's roughly the point where the galaxy's gravity starts to really tug on individual stars more strongly than the cluster's own gravity.
Yeah.
About 9 parsecs. Then a larger halo region out to 18 parsecs, and even further out to a 30 parsec distance limit.
And this let them map it out.
Yes, it allowed them to map the cluster's shape and density profile. They found 85 stars in that core.
Right.
0.381 within the tidal radius, 568 in the halo, and 710 within that 30 parsec limit they set.
Interesting. And I think the source mentioned Gaia also helped kick some stars out of the family tree.
That's right. This more precise data, especially the motion data, also led them to conclude that about 200 stars previously thought to be members probably aren't part of the Hyades after all.
So Gaia not only helped us find a much bigger family, but also helped us create a more accurate family tree. Fascinating.
Cleaner sample, much bigger sample.
What did they learn about the cluster's overall characteristics with this expanded, cleaner membership?
Well, from the stars within that tidal radius, the 381 stars, they calculated a very precise average distance to the cluster, 47.03 parsecs.
And the uncertainty.
Incredibly small, plus or minus just zero point 0.20 parsecs. Compare that to the 0.27 from Hipparcos, but now based on many more stars identified with much higher confidence.
Much more precise.
And they also got a very accurate measure of the cluster's overall velocity through space, about 46 kilometers per second.
Okay. And what about the structure itself? You mentioned 3D mapping.
Yes, by seeing the 3D arrangement of so many more stars, they could start to estimate how much mass the cluster has likely lost over its 600-odd million-year lifetime, as stars have gradually drifted away due to internal dynamics and galactic tides.
Right, understanding its evolution. And one of the interesting phenomena they could study in more detail was mass segregation. Can you explain what that is and what Gaia revealed?
Sure, mass segregation is basically the idea that in a star cluster, over time, the heavier, more massive stars tend to sink towards the center.
Why does that happen?
It's due to gravitational interactions between the stars, a process called dynamical friction. The massive stars lose energy in encounters and drift inwards, while lighter stars gain energy and tend to move outwards. Like shaking a jar of nuts, the big Brazil nuts end up on top. Right. Oh, wait, no, the opposite. Heavier things sink, like sediment in water.
Okay, heavier sinks to the middle.
Right. And Gaia data clearly confirmed this is happening in the Hyades. It showed that, on average, the less massive stars are indeed found further out from the cluster's core.
That's a neat confirmation of what theorists predicted. The research also delves into luminosity and mass functions. What can those tell us about the Hyades?
So the luminosity function tells us how many stars of different intrinsic brightnesses are in the cluster. The mass function tells us how many stars of different masses there are.
Okay, the population count by brightness or weight.
Exactly. By combining Gaia's precise brightness measurements with infrared data from surveys like 2MASS, astronomers could create these functions for the Hyades over a very wide range of stellar weights, from stars about 2.5 times the mass of our sun, all the way down to tiny stars, only about 4% of the sun's mass entering the brown dwarf territory.
That's a huge range.
It is. And what's really interesting is that the shape of these functions, the relative number of high mass versus low mass stars, seems to change depending on how far you are from the cluster's center.
Reflecting that mass segregation again.
Exactly. It's likely due to that mass segregation and potentially other internal evolutionary processes like stars escaping.
And of course, a fundamental tool for understanding star clusters is the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, the HR diagram. What new insights did Gaia provide there?
Oh, the HR diagram constructed using Gaia DR2 data for the Hyades and other nearby clusters is just remarkably crisp and well-defined.
Like a sharper picture.
Much sharper. Think of it like a very clear snapshot of stellar evolution at a specific age. The tightness of the main sequence, that band, where most stars spend the majority of their lives burning hydrogen, really underscores the fact that these stars in the Hyades do indeed share a common age and origin. It's beautiful to see.
And I think Lodu et al. Use this too.
Yes, as our sources point out, Lodu and colleagues also use this precise data to take a fresh look at the various methods for estimating the Hyades' age, comparing results.
Now, beyond the main body of the cluster, it sounds like Gaia has also revealed some surprising structures in the outer regions. I'm thinking about these tidal tails that are mentioned.
Ah, yes, the tails. That's one of the really spectacular findings from Gaia.
What are they and why are they so significant?
So tidal tails are basically streams of stars that have been pulled away, stripped from a star cluster by the gravitational forces of the galaxy, the Milky Way's tidal forces as the cluster orbits.
Like the galaxy stretching it out?
Exactly. Before Gaia, we had theoretical models predicting these tails should exist for clusters like the Hyades, but actually seeing them clearly was difficult.
But Gaia changed that.
Completely. Gaia's incredibly precise measurements of positions and velocities for so many stars allowed us to finally trace these faint extended structures. 2 separate studies highlighted in our sources, one by Roser and colleagues, and another by Maingast and Alves, both reported detecting these extensive tails using Gaia DR2.
And these tails are really stretching out, aren't they? How far do they go?
Oh, they're huge. They are quite flattened, lying mostly in the plane of our galaxy, maybe only about 25 parsecs thick,
Uh-huh.
but they extend across a massive area of the sky, over 100 degrees.
A third of the way across the visible sky. Wow.
Yeah. The leading tail, the one ahead of the cluster in its orbit around the galaxy, has been traced for an astonishing 170 parsecs.
That's like 3 or 4 times the distance to the cluster center itself.
Easily. And it contains nearly 300 stars identified so far. The trailing tail, the one behind the cluster, stretches for about 70 parsecs and has over 200 identified stars.
That's an incredible picture, the Hyades literally being pulled apart, stretched, and sculpted by the galaxy's gravity over vast distances.
It really visualizes the process of cluster dissolution in action.
And our sources even mention an S-shape to these tails. What's that about?
Yes, when you map these tails in 3D and look at them sort of from above the plane of the Milky Way, they exhibit a distinct S shape.
Is that expected?
It isn't a complete surprise, actually. We've seen similar shapes in the tidal tails of some globular clusters, which are much older and more massive. And importantly, it beautifully matches what our theoretical N-body simulations predict for the shape and the spread of velocities within these stellar streams as they get stretched by the galaxy's rotation and gravity.
So theory and observation matching up perfectly.
It's a real triumph for our understanding of how galaxies and star clusters interact dynamically. Really validates the models.
Fantastic. Okay, let's shift our focus now to the smaller, fainter members of the Hyades family, the brown dwarfs and white dwarfs. Starting with brown dwarfs, what has Gaia revealed there?
Right, the brown dwarfs. Before Gaia, we knew of only about 16 brown dwarfs thought to be associated with the Hyades.
And these are the failed stars.
Yeah, often called failed stars. They're more massive than planets, but not quite massive enough, below about 8% of the sun's mass, to ignite sustained hydrogen fusion in their cores, like true stars. Really interesting objects.
So what did Gaia add?
Well, by combining Gaia DR2 data, the positions, parallaxes, and proper motions, with infrared observations from ground-based surveys like 2MASS and the WISE Space Telescope.
Because brown dwarfs are brighter in infrared.
Exactly. They're cooler and emit more light at longer wavelengths. Perez Garrido and colleagues used this combo to search for objects with the right distance and motion to be Hyades members.
And they found
They identified a total of 37 brown dwarf candidates whose properties align really well with the Hyades. 21 of these were brand new discoveries.
21 new ones. So again, Gaia data more than doubled the known population.
Pretty much. Now, it's worth noting that while Gaia is very good at finding regular hydrogen-burning stars in the Hyades down to faint limits, it's likely still missing some of the very faintest, lowest mass brown dwarfs. Its sensitivity drops off for these really dim objects.
Still, more than doubling the known brown dwarf population in the Hyades gives us a much richer sample to study these intriguing in-between objects in a well-understood environment, right? Same age, same distance.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic laboratory sample.
Okay, what about the end stages of stellar evolution? The white dwarfs, the remnants of stars like our sun.
Yes, the Hyades is also known to host white dwarfs. Before Gaia, we knew of 9. These are the dense, hot cores left behind by sun-like stars after they've exhausted their nuclear fuel and shed their outer layers.
And Gaia helped study these too.
Definitely. Ledoux and his team, in that same big study, used Gaia's precise measurements of the white dwarf's brightness and colors their photometry to estimate their cooling ages.
How long they've been cooling down.
Right, and they found ages around 640 to 670 million years, depending slightly on the theoretical models used.
And how does that compare to the main sequence age?
It's remarkably consistent. Remember, the main sequence turn-off age was around 625 million years. Adding the relatively short lifetime of the progenitor stars before they became white dwarfs gets you right in that ballpark. It's a valuable independent cross-check on the cluster's age.
So these stellar remnants provide another independent clock for the Hyades. That's cool. What else have we learned about them thanks to Gaia?
Well, because the Hyades white dwarfs are all roughly the same age, formed from stars within a known cluster, and we now have very accurate distance measurements to them from Gaia, they form an ideal coeval group for testing models of how white dwarfs cool down over time, and for studying the relationship between a star's initial mass and the final mass of the white dwarf it leaves behind.
The initial final mass relation.
Exactly. For instance, another study by Solaris and Bedin, using Gaia DR2 data, found that assuming an overall cluster age closer to maybe 690 million years actually leads to an initial final mass relation slope that aligns better with findings from other independent studies of white dwarfs in different environments.
So Gaia helps refine not just the properties of the Hyades, but these fundamental astrophysical relationships too.
Precisely. It's all interconnected.
And it sounds like Gaia has even allowed for some very detailed measurements of individual white dwarfs, like their mass through gravitational redshift.
That sounds complex.
It is pretty neat. Gravitational redshift is the effect where light loses a tiny bit of energy, shifting to redder wavelengths as it climbs out of a strong gravitational field, like that of a super-dense white dwarf.
Okay.
To measure it, you need to know the star's actual velocity very precisely, so you can subtract the normal Doppler shift due to its motion, and Gaia provides that velocity.
For some nearby stars like those in the Hyades, Gaia's incredibly precise measurements of their position changes over time allow us to deduce their radial velocity, their motion towards or away from us, purely from the astrometry. It's amazing.
Wow.
So Pasquini and collaborators used this technique for Hyades white dwarfs. They could measure the gravitational redshift and directly estimate the white dwarf's masses.
And what did they find?
They found that the masses they derived from gravitational redshift were consistently a little bit smaller by about 0.002 to 0.05 solar masses than masses obtained through other methods, like fitting atmospheric models to their spectra.
That doesn't sound like much, 0.05 solar masses.
It might seem tiny, but in the world of white dwarf physics, it's actually a significant discrepancy. It could point to subtle issues in our models of white dwarf atmospheres or interiors, or maybe even in our understanding of gravity in these strong field regimes. It's an active area of research.
That's fascinating. Even these tiny differences can offer big clues in astrophysics. Precision measurements leading to new questions.
That's often how science progresses.
And finally, our sources mention that this much more complete list of Hyades members from Gaia is also proving useful in other areas, like studying X-ray sources.
Yes, that's another benefit. With a much more complete and, importantly, much more reliable catalog of confirmed Hyades members, thanks to Gaia DR2.
Knowing for sure who's in the club.
Exactly. Researchers like Freund and colleagues have been able to go back and revisit nearly 300 X-ray sources that were previously detected in the direction of the Hyades by space telescopes like ROSAT, Chandra, and XMM Newton over the years.
And figure out which ones are actually Hyades stars.
Right. By cross-matching with the Gaia list, they can determine with high confidence which of these X-ray emitters are genuinely part of the Hyades cluster and which are just unrelated foreground or background objects.
Why is that useful?
Because then you can study the X-ray properties like brightness, variability, temperature of stars with a known age and distance. It gives us valuable insights into stellar magnetic activity, coronae, and how that activity evolves over time for stars in a well-defined population like the Hyades.
So Gaia helps clean up and enhance studies across different wavelengths, too.
Absolutely. Its impact ripples through many areas of astronomy.
So to summarize then, it's clear that the Gaia mission has truly revolutionized our understanding of the Hyades star cluster. We've gone from knowing, maybe a couple hundred members?
At best.
To nearly 2,000 identified with high confidence. We have incredibly precise distance measurements now.
Down to fractions of a parsec uncertainty for the mean distance.
We have detailed insights into its 3D structure, how it's experiencing mass segregation, how it's being stretched and shaped into vast tidal tails by the galaxy.
Seeing that process unfold is just remarkable.
And we have a much better understanding of the full populations of stars within it, from the main sequence down through the brown dwarfs and even into the white dwarf remnants.
A much more complete census across the mass spectrum and evolutionary stages.
Absolutely. The Hyades remains as vital as ever, doesn't it? Not just as a nearby, easy-to-see cluster, but as that crucial anchor for the entire cosmic distance scale.
Still fundamental for calibrating distances.
And as an invaluable natural laboratory for testing our theories of how stars evolve across a vast range of masses and throughout their entire life cycles.
Couldn't have said it better. It's a cornerstone cluster.
It really makes you wonder about those vast tidal tails stretching out across the galaxy. What other secrets about the long-term fate of open clusters in the Milky Way might they reveal as we study them further?
Or, yeah, thinking about those subtle differences in white dwarf mass measurements, could they hint at something fundamental we're still missing in our understanding of stellar remnants or even gravity itself?
It's amazing to think that this seemingly small patch of light in our night sky, the Hyades, continues to offer such profound insights into the vastness and complexity of our galaxy.
The closer we look, especially with tools like Gaia, the more fascinating it becomes.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Hyades today.
My pleasure.